Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Pilots and Prop Wash. I wanted to clear up a few little misconceptions about the United States Army acquiring the A-10 Warthog. And although I know there are a lot of stories and rumors out there that the Army wanted to take the Warthog and the Air Force would not give them to them, partly due to, well, probably almost entirely due to the 1948 Key West Agreement, there is actually not a lot of truth in that I can find. I've talked to quite a few people and done some research. Now, of course, it's possible that some of this information is not complete, and if you know something about it, please put it in the comment section below, but here goes. One question is, how come the Air Force is so anxious to retire the A-10? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First off, most aircraft in the Air Force are multi-mission. The Air Force is not really that big on single-mission aircraft anymore for a lot of reasons. Needless to say, cost being one of them, but also the entire training pipeline and maintenance and logistics pipeline for one type of aircraft that only does one job is extremely taxing on the service, even if that aircraft is the best in the world at what it does. Another reason the Air Force wants to retire the A-10 is they're not only getting old and hard to maintain, or I should say more accurately, they've gotten old and are hard to maintain, but they also are probably not very survivable in a modern first world battlefield. Needless to say, the modern battle space is extremely dangerous, even a more sophisticated aircraft. And the A-10, as rugged and tough as it is, isn't particularly fast, and it certainly isn't stealthy. Now, it is great for fighting an enemy that doesn't have any air defense, where you have air superiority. It's one of the biggest cans of whoop-ass that's flying in the world today. But the asset's of limited value if it doesn't come back in one piece. Now, a lot of people have said that the Army's tried to acquire the aircraft, but that's apparently not entirely accurate. In 2015, Secretary of the Army John McHugh stated that there was no chance the Army would ever take over the A-10 fleet. Further stated it was not even a serious topic of conversation. The reasons for this aren't that the Army would not like to have an asset with those capabilities. It simply boils down to the Army does not have the fixed-wing combat aircraft training pipelines, nor do they possess the large established air bases required for A-10 operations. You have to remember one of the biggest advantages of the Army using helicopters is they can land pretty much anywhere. And pretty much anywhere seems to be where the Army has to operate. Even if the Army had been interested in acquiring the A-10s, pretty sure once they saw how much it was going to cost, they would have said no. It would have simply swallowed up too much of their budget. The Pentagon brass knows that they could not afford it. That being said, the Army very much kicks up dust when the Air Force talks about retiring the platform. The Army wants the platform available to them. They don't want the Air Force to retire the airplane, but they don't want to get saddled with the cost and expense and logistics of trying to keep it operating. This is one of the reasons the A-10 hasn't been retired despite several attempts by the Air Force. The debates will continue on about the future of close air support. At the rate things are going, it's very likely going to move over to drones, thus making this entire debate moot. To paraphrase military jargon, it's all about steel on target or warheads on foreheads. How they get there is just a matter of modern technology. I'm always leery when somebody says, we'll never need this again. I mean, how many times has that been said in the past and proven itself wrong? A perfect example of this is when, during the Second World War, Razorback fighters started getting bubble top canopies. They even had to make the tails bigger on a lot of them to offset the loss of stability from reducing the fuselage area. But it was well worth it to have that extra visibility. This was such common knowledge by the end of the war that the first generations of jets all had bubble canopies on them. But then the missiles came out. We don't need no guns, we have missiles. And we don't need bubble canopies. We'll go faster with Razorbacks because it's all going to be missile the day the dogfight is dead. Yeah, that didn't age well. Now most of our modern jet fighters have bubble canopies and guns to go with the missiles. It's a blend. As a kid, I was told there are two words you should try to avoid using: always and never. Those phrases tend not to age well because the future is an uncertain thing. With all this being said, I do not claim to have the answer. I don't think the Army could afford the A-10 any more than they could afford a lot of the modern aircraft. Perhaps they could afford something like the Texan II, set up as a coin aircraft, and that certainly has some advantages. But the simple fact is, adding any new aircraft type to a fleet is massively expensive, and the helicopters they have are doing the job. And when they need heavier payload dropped on a target, that's when they call in the Air Force. The system may not be perfect, but it does work. That being said, would it really kill the Air Force if the Army had a few fixed-wing aircraft for special assignments? Military planners have the unfortunate job of having to look to the future, to what the next conflict is going to bring. None of us can really predict what's going to happen with any great accuracy. It's possible it may be drone warfare, or it could turn into one of those situations where, wow, the Air Force is busy doing other things. It sure would be nice if we had our own jets. One thing I do not like is the turfism that takes place. A lot of people have felt that we need to revisit the 1948 Key West Agreement, and that is a fair argument. It would probably make life easier on everyone if the Army had a certain amount of its own internal airlift, and maybe even some fixed-wing combat assets. That's a little hard to argue against, but I don't think the A-10 is the airplane they would get. Although the Army is looking at some other very sophisticated stuff, sometimes it can really be hard to tell the line between a credible argument for mission specificity and good old-fashioned turfism. And we're not naive. None of us are going to pretend that budgets don't have something to do with it. In the end, what needs to be the primary focus is what provides the warfighter the best possible solution and the taxpayer the best possible bargain. I have a sneaking suspicion that's going to end up being drones. There is a strong argument to be made for a relatively low-cost, straightforward manned platform, if for no other reason that we can never be sure what technology will be developed that may prevent drones from being successful in the future. We may have to go back to having a person in the cockpit. Sadly, we won't know until the shooting starts, if it starts, and hopefully it won't. But I fear that's just being naive. All of this is one technological development away from being a moot point, so we'll see as the future unfolds. Well, this was just some thoughts that was going through my mind. You guys leave your comments below. We'll talk at you later. Smooth rides and early arrivals.